Issachar 54,400, and Zebulun 57,400. To the south, Reuben 46,500, Simeon 59,300, and Gad 45,650. To the west, Ephraim 40,500, Manasseh 32,200, and Benjamin 35,400.
Oh.
And to the north, Dan 62,700, Asher 41,500, and Naphtali 53,400. This formation was kept also while travelling. Each tribe had its own Nasi, prince or leader, and its own flag with its tribal colour and emblem. That's it. That's it, Rabbi. That's all I've got. Hello. Here.
She's back.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm very choppy. Was that just me? Or choppy for everyone?
We're waiting for the next slide.
Yes.
Yeah, with her.
While we're waiting, I'm puzzled about the fact that always the population is always exactly on a 10 or 100 or a 50.
You all hear Iris? Okay. Go on. What do you
Yeah.
More or less, yeah.
What are you puzzled
Why
by?
are the numbers rounded up to the zero?
They're always round numbers. They're always either 100 or a 50.
Sorry, you're breaking up. I'm changed connections. Ah, good question. I think they're more exact in the Torah. I think they might have just been rounded up in this summary.
Oh, right. No, I seem to remember reading it before and thinking the same thing when we were reading it in shul, I think.
Look, there weren't exactly 600,000 either. I mean, at some point things get rounded, don't they, I suppose?
Yes.
Where did the Kohanim go? It talks about the Levites and all the other tribes. Who did the Kohanim walk with?
Well, they were in front with before the sanctuary's entranceway to the east, were the tents of Moses, Aaron, and Aaron's sons. They were Aaron and Aaron's sons were the only Kohanim at that time.
How did they get chosen to be Kohanim?
Because they were Aaron,
that goes back to when Aaron was appointed.
Yeah, but why was he appointed, and how did you get this group of people to be Kohanim forever?
Oh, you have to go back to the earlier parshas for that from Vayikra, right? Of course, originally it was going to be the firstborn, and we had the whole incident with the calf. Sorry, I'm just trying to work out how to share the video on Facebook. Just give me a moment. Keep talking.
Who was Aaron's wife and the mother of all these?
Elisheva. Wasn't she?
Do we know anything about her?
Oh, wait, no, Elisheva was... No, she wasn't. Wait, Elisheva was... I think she was Elisheva. Okay, I can't work out how to share my video here. This is annoying. Okay, never mind.
Wasn't she an aunt or a cousin or a niece or something?
Probably. Okay, here we go.
I think she was related.
Here we go. Sorry, I'm just trying to share my... Okay, so... all good questions. Let's cover the material, and then hopefully we can discuss the questions as well at the end. So... okay. Right. So next slide. We're going to look at Bamidbar. We're not going to look at the numbers, though these are all good questions. Let's see what material we've got here for now. Right. Nice, easy one. Who would like to read source number 2?
Oh, I'll do it then as it's easy. Right. Okay. Right. On the first day of the second month in the second year, following the exodus from the land of Egypt, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting, saying.
Okay, so the crucial part is they speaking to them in the desert. Okay, so question, probably partially answering here. There's a reason for everything. So Bamidbar is read always before Shavuos, usually Shabbos before, I think. So what is the connection? There are many, many sedras that you could read that talk about the giving of the Torah. You could read from Exodus. or from bits of Devarim. What's the connection? And some of you know it from previous years. What's the connection between Bamidbar, between the desert and the Torah? There's not an obvious one. But actually, it's very unobvious. Next week's going to be about the revelation of the Torah at Mount Sinai. And meanwhile, what are we doing? We're busy counting people, and we're talking about the events in the wilderness of Sinai. There's no mention of revelation other than the Midbar Sinai desert and the Mount Sinai. There's no obvious connection at all. They're not walking towards. They're not walking towards Sinai. It's all very strange. But the rabbis very cleverly did come up with a connection. Here's the connection. Who would like to read source 3? Sorry, then. Yeah, source 3.
I'll read. And God spoke to Moses in the Sinai wilderness. Why the Sinai wilderness? From here the sages taught that the Torah was given through 3 things: fire, water, and wilderness. How do we know it was given through fire? From Exodus 19:18, and Mount Sinai was all in smoke as God had come down upon it in fire. How do we know it was given through water? As it says in Judges chapter 5, verse 4, the heavens dripped and the clouds dripped water at Sinai. How do we know it's given through wilderness? As it says above, and God spoke to Moses in the Sinai wilderness. Why was the Torah given through these 3 things? Just as fire, water, and wilderness are free to all the inhabitants of the world, so too are the words of Torah free to them, as it says in Isaiah chapter 55, verse 1. Oh, all who are thirsty come for water, even if you have no money.
Okay, I don't know if you're legally allowed to charge for water. Do restaurants still have to give out water if you walk in? They always used to say they did. That was tap water or whatever. Certainly in hot countries they do. So fire, water, and sand, desert. Okay. Fire, why? Because it says that the mountain, there was smoke coming out of the mountain. That was the special effects. Water is based on Judges. That's from the Song of Devorah, actually. The heavens dripped and the clouds dripped at Sinai. It was raining, very British. And the desert, as it says, also at the beginning of the section that talks about even 10 commandments, took place in the desert. Now, if I said fire to you, what is the first thing you would think is fire is free? It doesn't cost you anything. You probably think fire is destructive and it spreads everywhere, or it generates heat, warmth, and energy. Yes. Water you'd think as quenching thirst or making things grow. And the wilderness you'd think as just a space with no direction in it. Just endless expanses of land. This is not what the rabbis said. What did the rabbis say? They said these are all metaphors. Oh, and these are all good metaphors for Torah, by the way. Torah is warmth and energy. Torah is satisfies thirst. Torah gives direction in the desert. But that's not what the rabbi said. The one point that they emphasize there in the Midrash is that they're all free to all. Right? Very crucial point there. They're free to all. I mean, there's other things you could say. The desert is a silent place where you hear the voice of God. There's no distractions of towns and cities and fields and farms. We have to work, right? You can have an oasis, literally. You realize your vulnerability. It's easy to get lost. You need some kind of guidance, which is where the Torah comes in. It's isolating. We all know about that nowadays. In fact, interestingly, the word for a wilderness is a midbar in Hebrew, which comes from the word daber, to speak. Make that connection. But none of those are mentioned. The one that's mentioned is this one thing, that 3 different points, ways of saying that Torah is free to all. Okay? And what's the greatest symbol of this, by the way? Right? Let's look at the next source. Everyone knows this. Every kid sings this as a child. Right? Who would like to read number 4?
I'll do it.
Brenda, Hebrew or English?
Moses charged us with the teaching as the heritage of the congregation of Jacob.
Okay, there's a missing word here. It should say of all of the congregation. It's not only for the priests or the rabbis, it's for everybody. Oops, quick. If anyone's ever been to any of the Asia Torah seminars, one of the things they always labor over is the difference between the revelation at Sinai and every other religion, right? Most religions, if you care to name any particular religion or cult, it's usually based on a revelation that happened to one person, right? Or a small group of people. Islam was Muhammad, right? The Church of Latter-day Saints was Reverend Moon, wasn't it? No, no, that's the Mormons. Was what's his name? Whatever his name was. Yes, thank you. The Moonies was Reverend Moon, right? Different cults. It was always God came to me and I'm passing on his words to you, right? That's not how Sinai was. God appeared at Sinai to the entire nation, right? Nobody was special. It's everybody's heritage, right? I think that's unique to Judaism. Right? Every other religion, there's some group of people who enjoyed the. Yes, we had prophets, right? And yes, Moshe spent 40 days and 40 nights up there. But our essential book, our essential teachings were given to all of us. It wasn't given to some unique elite group, right? And we know that Sinai was the lowest of mountains. It was the great equalizer. So the sages chose this as the example. Very important idea, right? Which you can interpret in many, many ways. That Torah is everybody's heritage. Nobody has a right to it. Okay, if you... Oh, Iris is calling me. One sec, just see if she's... Hi, Iris, have you been knocked off? Oh, maybe write it... Yeah, maybe worth writing it down. 1 second. Okay, 1 second. Sorry, folks.
Get this trouble, do we?
Yeah, that's right. 1562. Okay. See you in a minute. Yeah, we see you. About to pay. Yeah, okay, great. Bye. We need full-time tech support with this. Right, everybody still there?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Right, so this is a very fundamental point here. That Torah is everybody's heritage, right? You look at Israel. You know, on the one hand, many secular Israelis are quite happy for the Haredim, the religious people, to learn the Torah. It's theirs, right? And for their part, many religious people are probably quite not bothered that the secular people don't see the Torah as their heritage. It's a tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy. Torah is everybody's heritage, right? Whether that means make it accessible to people, so it shouldn't be behind a firewall where it costs you hundreds of pounds to sign up for a share, or whether it means having it translated into English or in sign language or in some other medium that makes it inclusive, right? This is an axiomatic, fundamental point of Torah, that it's everybody's heritage, right? And if somebody doesn't have access to heritage, you have to help them. Very important point. So when the sages wanted to find an analogy for fire, for water, for the desert, they chose what they felt was perhaps one of the most important ones, that Torah is equal to everyone. It's not, and it's not for the people in the cities, it's not for the people in the farms, it's not for this person, it's not for that person. Just like fire and water and the desert are basically ownerless and free for all, so it is with Torah. Let's just have a look at the Shemitah, which we just read. 1 second. Oh, going too fast, sorry. Okay, sorry, not the Shemitah. Yeah, this is the Hakel, which takes place after Shemitah. Okay, in the year after Shemitah, everyone would gather, the king would read the book of Devarim. So again, it's all of Israel. Let's see. Who would like to read number 5?
I'll read that one.
Jeff.
And Moses instructed them as follows. Every 7th year, the year set for remission at the Feast of Booths, when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God, in the place that he will choose, you shall read this teaching aloud in the presence of all Israel.
Sorry, in better English, right? At the end of the 7th year, so in the 8th year actually, in the Shemitah year, what's the Feast of Booths? At Sukkot, when people have come to Jerusalem for the Pilgrim Festival. What's the place he will choose? That's the temple, right? So this is what you should read aloud before all of Israel. Carry on, yeah, number 12, sorry.
Gather the people, men, women, children, and the strangers in your communities, that they may hear and so learn to revere the Lord your God, and to observe faithfully every word of this teaching. Their children too, who have not had the experience, shall hear and learn to revere the Lord your God as long as they live in the land that you're about to cross the Jordan to possess.
Right? Again, all of Israel, gather the people, men, women, and children, everybody. The children too should have this experience, right? It doesn't say teach your sages and your great intellectuals. It says every single person, right? Every one of us, right? We find the same thing also, we say on a Shabbos morning, right before Aleinu, right? I'll just read this one quickly. It says, all of your children. It didn't have to say all of your children. It could have said your children. It says all of your children shall be disciples of the Lord, and great shall be the happiness of your children. Every last one of them, right? So any society that has just an elite group of people that are studying the Torah, that's not what the Torah seems to want. The Torah says every single person. So the problem is, of course, if every single person isn't doing it or doesn't have access, how you create that access. Okay? Torah is a constitution not for the elite, but it's for every single one of us.
Rabbi, can I ask a
Non-Jews as
question?
well, Rabbi.
Yeah, quite. Sorry.
Non-Jews as well.
Well, good question. Okay, so obviously we talk about the heritage of the Jewish people. The truth is that we know that there is the concept that non-Jews are supposed to follow the Noahide laws. So in reality, they also have to learn certain concepts from the Torah. I'm a big fan of Lord Sachs, and one of the things I think that he revolutionized during his time in office is to create a medium, if you like, and to be a force for disseminating Torah teachings to the wider world. Madonna and her Kabbalah, that's all a bit of a joke. But when Lord Sachs spoke, people listened. I don't know if anyone listened to my interview with Baroness Deitch yesterday morning. She said when Lord Sachs is in the Lords, and he's not there that often, he's traveling, she said when he's there, people take notice.
Yeah.
Right? They listen to what he has to
You
say.
heard that.
When he was,
Very good.
yeah, when he was chief rabbi, I mean, Gordon Brown used to go to him for advice. They didn't go to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Right? So one thing, there are things he was more successful in, things he was less successful in. One thing he was phenomenally successful in is getting the idea out to the wider society that Judaism has universal teachings and values that society can benefit from. And it's true. And if you think about it, a lot of things we talk about social justice, we talk about, family values and marriage and, the importance of community and volunteering. These are all universal concepts. Shabbos and tefillah and mezuzah and lighting Hanukkah candles and observing the Yom Tovim are specific to us. But if you think about it, a lot of our concepts are very universal. There's no reason that they can't be made universal. So the answer to your question is, a non-Jew doesn't have to study Torah in the same way, but there's certainly a lot of concepts that Torah can offer to society, right? And ironically, America, which is the country that has separation of church and state, has the 10 Commandments in every courtroom because they talk about the origins of their legal system in Judeo-Christian. It's not really Christian, it's Judeo, right? Jewish law. But we see a theme here, just going back again. It's always about the collective. Moshe charged us with the teaching of the heritage it's our heritage, not his heritage. It's ours, all of us, right? Gather the men and women, children, end of the Shemitah and read the Torah. The king reads the Torah to everybody, including children. Maybe this is where the idea of getting children to come to shul on Shavuot and hear the 10 Commandments comes from, right? All your children. Doesn't just say the bright ones. Doesn't say your gifted children, right? I got myself in a pickle once. They used to have a program called Release Time in New York City. You have to understand, because of separation of church and state in America, it's very hard to do any religious things. So they had a legal exemption. They had something called Release Time, that for 1 hour a week, legally, they were allowed to take there were a lot of Jewish children, particularly Russian immigrants, in public schools, in state schools, right? Public school means a public school in America. In state schools, getting no Jewish, there's no cheder, forget it. They're not getting any Jewish education. And a law was a local city law in New York that allows them 1 hour a week. They can go to a synagogue or a Jewish center and they can have an hour of religious instruction a week. And it's amazing. I used to go and do it with these kids. They're literally no background whatsoever. And they would do games and teachings and a bit of dabbling and so on. Somehow it passed under the constitutional radar. So anyway, we went to one of these schools, and I don't remember what happened. We went to a certain school. We were just trying to see if there was anyone for our program. She said, "Do you have any Jewish children?" So she said, the teacher said, "We have a few gifted children. I think one or two of them might be Jewish." It took me a while to realize that by gifted, she meant special needs. I don't know if that's still in use, but it was very confusing. Anyway, so not just your gifted children, not just your whatever, set one children, not just your bright children, but all of your children, every child, right, shall be disciples of the Lord. If anyone's familiar with Chumash generally, when it says v'chol, it means all. Otherwise, it could have just said your children shall be disciples of the Lord. Very strong language. Okay, now.
Can I ask a question before you go on?
Yeah, please ask. Go away.
Right. Is the Torah learnt more now, or was it learnt more when there was, like, in the, say, 18th, 19th centuries, when there was no TV and no internet?
Oh, good question. So I don't know. Right.
People,
I don't know this. Sorry, yeah?
Yeah, what I'm saying is, it would seem to me that if there's no TV and no internet, the rabbis would have more time to teach. Kind of, there'd be more time.
But then from the other side, the internet allows easier dissemination of Torah.
Yeah.
So I'll give you my thoughts.
Yeah.
People say there's more Torah learning going on in the land of Israel than ever in history, right? There's so many yeshivas and seminaries and so on. I don't know the numbers. I do know that when the Baal Shem Tov started the Hasidic movement, you had very much a town and gown kind of scenario where certain people were scholars who could read, who could study, and a lot of the proletariat were not. They were just that, what they called the Amei Haaretz, the masses, right? And they were treated with disdain by the elite because they couldn't study Talmud and they couldn't read, right? Why do we have the repetition of the Amidah? Because people couldn't read. So the Chazan had to say it for them. Or they didn't have books, they didn't have printing. So on the one hand, you're right, there were fewer distractions. On the other hand, life was harder. More people had to work crazy hours and do all kinds of stuff. There was more poverty, less affluence, less literacy. So just because people had the time to sit and study doesn't mean they did. And there was also a lot of times this split. So the elite may have studied, but the masses didn't. And so you have things like we learned in the Mishnah where it says, if a Am Haaretz, which literally is an ignoramus, basically means whatever, a working class person, if you like. Whether you can trust him that he's taken the right tithes from his food because he may not know the halachas. Now, fast forward to nowadays, you have all these distractions, but you also have thousands of people studying Torah who are not necessarily devout, observant people, but they're engaging with Torah. You have thousands of books available. You have websites available. You have online content. I think
Zoom.
I think that the spectrum of people within the Jewish and wider society who are studying Jewish teachings is wider than it's ever been before. Now, I can't prove that to you, but it's just my hunch. Because we have so much going on and things are translated into English. My father remembers growing up, they didn't have English translations of a lot of things. You either, again, if you listen to my interview with Baroness Deitch, I don't know who she spoke to, but it's a shame because she said, I asked if she'd had any involvement with sort of Jewish medical ethics in her work at the HFEA. So she said she spoke to somebody and they basically said, well, you have to know biblical Hebrew. I said, well, sorry, I don't. But that doesn't make any sense. I have a 3-volume set, the Encyclopedia of Jewish Medical Ethics in English, with full footnotes, cross-reference. You can Google almost any topic. You'll find English sources, high-level sources, or in any other language you want. There are people doing things in sign language. There are people doing things in ways to making Torah accessible to people with special needs. So I think we're doing more than ever before, ironically, right? And in Israel, coming back to Israel, you have now the phenomenon of a lot of people trying to encourage secular Israelis to recognize that Torah is your heritage as well, right? In the same way that every traditional family in England sent their kids to Cheder, right? And that was what you do. In Israel, there was perhaps a perception that, certainly yeshiva type settings are for the very orthodox. I have a friend who I would describe as traditional. I think there's Shomer Shabbat. Certainly he used to walk to shul from quite a distance. I think he tried to be Shomer Shabbat. His wife was Israeli originally, perhaps to a less degree Shomer Shabbat, but very traditional. He used to go to all the shiurim and things. They moved to Israel. So he says to his wife, of course, we want the kids in an Orthodox school. And for him, Orthodox means, like synagogue, traditional. She's like, no, you don't understand. She said, here, Orthodox means Haredi, basically. There isn't a traditional setting. Now, it's not strictly true. There are settings, but it's much more polarized. So in England, it's quite normal for kids to grow up and go to Cheder or go to a Jewish school and get some access or exposure, however poor quality, in some cases, to Torah. In Israeli society, it's very polarized. People learn Tanakh, they learn Jewish history. But the notion, secular Israeli wouldn't want to study traditional teachings. Leave it for the Haredim. And the Haredim say, oh, they shouldn't learn it because they're not pure or whatever. I don't know if they really say that. But no, Torah is for everybody. It's everybody's heritage. Everyone, every child, right? Very important. Every adult as well. So Baruch Hashem, I think we live in times where that is far more palpable because there are so many ways to learn. You don't need a traditional teacher to access the texts in the same way you did 2 generations ago. Right? The Catholic Church for years, it was banned. People were banned from studying the Bible. I mean, I've never understood. You couldn't have a Bible in your house in the early years because they were worried people might get too smart. Right? You know, it's information control. You know, Judaism was never about that. Everybody should learn. Everybody should have access. Somebody in Hungary came out with Psak Din, which discusses the fact that basically that is the chief rabbi there, that just because the government's opening the shul, opening their buildings up, doesn't mean the shul should necessarily open. And he goes to a very argued case as to why, if there's any danger to life, you're forbidden to daven with a minyan. And he quotes all his sources, right? Now he didn't have to. Now you could say he's the chief rabbi. All he has to say is do as I say. If you, interestingly, when somebody gives a Psak Din, and you'll notice, like, if you go read any of the traditional sources, what we call the teshuvot, the shilas and teshuvas, the questions and answers that are recorded, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein or people like that, there's always hundreds of footnotes. Everything is referenced. Nothing is a secret, right? Nothing's being hidden. And it's not some great mystery. This is why people are a bit bemused when people say you have to ask one of the you know the leading rabbis in Israel who to vote for in the elections, right? But because that's a halachic matter. I mean, unless a particular party is going to endanger Jewish life, it's not a halachic matter. And if it was a halachic matter, they provide sources. When somebody gives a ruling, they provide sources, right? It's all transparent. You could look it up yourself. Very important idea. It's everybody's. It's for everybody. You need people to help you access it. Fine. You need people to give rulings that understand the legal process. Right? It's just like the Supreme Court. They publish rulings. It's hundreds of pages. They're not hiding anything. Right? The last one I read was JFS ruling, 200 pages. Very long. Very interesting, though. They're quite clear and transparent about their reasoning. So the same thing with halacha, the same thing with Judaism and Torah. We're not hiding anything. Right? And if somebody is hiding something, if you ask a shaila and the answer is just because, right? Unless it's like, why do we do this? Because it's a custom, fine. If somebody says, why can't I do this on Shabbos? Just because, there's not an answer. There is always an answer. Right? The only thing that doesn't have an answer is why the red heifer purifies. Right? Even Moshe didn't know that. All the reasons for mitzvah, we don't always know the reasons for. But a halachic question, if somebody gives you an answer and won't give you a reference, if they say I have to look up the reference, if they won't give you a reference, there's something wrong. Right? Torah is everybody's heritage.
Yeah, but can I ask another question? Just a quick one then.
Or even a non-quick one, yeah.
Are the children of today taught to translate the Hebrew automatically, or they just taught to read it? Because it'd be a lot easier.
I don't know. I don't know.
You don't know.
My own kids can pretty much translate stuff. Where they learn that skill in school, I don't actually know. I'd have to ask them. I think in general. So, what's the downside of all this English stuff and all these online things? Obviously, is people are not as inclined to take up the skills of reading the original text. That's not a problem. There's nothing wrong with Chumash in English. The problem is, it's like anything else. You lose the nuances. Right? Hebrew is a very nuanced language. Every word has many meanings, many layers. If you have, I've got somewhere here a Hebrew English dictionary, right? So the English Hebrew is about, that fat. The Hebrew English is much thinner because there's fewer words and they are much more nuanced. So it's not that it's a problem to do things in English. It's that things get lost in translation. A word that has many layers of meaning in Hebrew, when you choose an English word for it, that's why this translation is very different from the Art Scroll translation. Why? Because it's a choice of words. The Hebrew is the same. So I think the answer to your question is, I don't know, and it depends on the schools. I know they do a lot of reading. Whether they translate is a very good question. In Hasmo, for example, they separate between biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew. So biblical Hebrew is definitely done as a language that you learn the grammar and so on. Modern Hebrew is done more as Ivrit. But I'm sure we don't do enough of it. We're all lazy. Look, I look things up in English. Well, my Hebrew's pretty good. It's a laziness, unfortunately. So that's the downside of all this access. The downside is we become complacent and we don't learn the skills. Right? For rabbis, it's in the old days, if you wanted to look up a good source for something, you had to take out about 20 books and put them on the table and sit in the library and study. Now you just Google it and it comes. You don't even have to Google it. Half the books they come out with for rabbis now are sound bites for sermons, right? Book of great quotes, right? So people could say, right, or kids in school Google things instead of having to learn the art of research. So people say, who cares? This is the world we live in. It's a lost art. And when you research things, you learn other things as well. So that's the downside. I don't want to use the phrase dumbing down, but let's call it dumbing down. in some senses, right? What's the argument against all this English and all this easy stuff and all these, you know, translations and explanations and, you know, things that are basically a crutch? So that's the argument against it, is that it takes people away from the original. And that's, by the way, the objection people have had to, for example, the art scroll Gemara. People in the yeshiva world, some people are up in arms. How can you produce? The whole idea of the Talmud was you break your teeth on the Hebrew. What's the point of having it in English, right? You know, like Catholics in Latin, basically. On the other hand, though, for most of us, it's a godsend. It helps us to have access to Torah and to understand it. I have to tell you, just by the way, I've been reading more of the Parsha in English because I'm not laning every week. Try to when I practice it. So instead, I'm reading it with English and I'm learning all kinds of things I never noticed before. It's quite fascinating. Some of it's quite scary, especially the curses last week. But
that's what as well. That's what.
Yeah. So
I didn't want to mention that, but yes, I read it in English last week, and it was
Yeah.
We read the English as well last week.
The question we were discussing in our house is we don't mention it in sermons because it's not the way nowadays, but an awful lot of those curses sound very topical. It's quite scary. Anyway, but back to this point, this is a really fundamental point of Judaism. Yes, you need teachers. Yes, you need rabbis and rebbitzins and whatever you call them, and mayanot and whoever it is to teach people. And we need madrachim, of course we do, right? Like in any area, right? You know, you need teachers for science and maths and English as well. But you know, what's the whole idea of core subjects in national curriculum? Every child should have access to it. Same thing in Judaism, right? Again, no secrets, nothing hidden. You may need the tools to unlock what you're studying, but no one's hiding anything from anyone. No one's going to say, oh, until you reach the 33rd degree or whatever, we can't explain this to you, right? We know in Judaism questioning is, right, as Lord Sachs says, I think, with regard to Pesach. I love this quote. The greatest nachas in, like, at least in the frum world, is when your son's teacher calls up and says, you know, Yankel asked a great question in class today. It's not necessarily an answer, right? The answer may not even exist. He asked a great question, right? We celebrate that in Judaism. Okay, so let's have a little bit more of a look at this topic. Now, in the times of the Babylonian exile, Ezra and Nehemiah gathered the people at the water gate in Jerusalem. I think we've quoted this before, on Rosh Hashanah, and they read the Torah to them. And the reason they did that was because it was the beginning of exile, and there was a concern. Sorry, it was they'd come back from exile. There was a concern that people would forget the Torah, and so what did they do? They didn't have a big celebration or a big parade or whatever. They gathered people together and they taught them. And it says they placed the Kohanim throughout the crowd to explain what was being said to people. Right? This is the first, perhaps the first recorded mass adult education program. Let's have a look. Who would like to read number 7? Who hasn't read yet? Pam.
Truly the name of that man is to be blessed, namely Joshua ben Gamla. But for him, the Torah would have been forgotten from Israel. For at first, if a child had a father, his father taught him. And if he had no father, he did not learn at all. They therefore ordained that teachers should be appointed in each prefecture, and that boys should enter school at the age of 16 or 17. They did so. But if the teacher punished them, they used to rebel and leave the school. Eventually, Joshua ben Gamla came and ordained that teachers of young children should be appointed in each district and each town, and that children should enter school at the age of 6 or 7.
Right. So, and before you ask about the girls, look, it was 2,000 years ago. So here we have number 1. What's the first thing Ezra and Nehemiah do? They establish an education. Education is the weapon of, if you like, right, survival. Not military might, but education. And the second thing is it's universal education. Right? There's so many different things here. Right? The fathers used to teach the sons. So then they appointed teachers. But then the problem was the boys would enter school at 16 or 17, and they didn't like to be told what to do at that age, and they would rebel and leave school, right? It's not a new phenomenon. So then they basically set up school from age 6 or 7, which is essentially what we have today. Anyone know when universal compulsory education started in England?
1852.
Right, apparently 1870. Was it 1852?
I don't know. I don't remember from my student
Right.
days, but I remember that day.
It says, okay, so it was sometime in the 19th century. Okay, this is 1700 years before that. The people of the book establishing a system of education, of teachers to teach. Right, this is what Josephus had to say. Who would like to read? Any volunteers?
Right, should any one of our nation be asked about our laws, he will repeat them as readily as his own name. The result of our thorough education in our laws from the very dawn of intelligence is that they are, as it were, engraved on our souls.
So Josephus basically says every Jewish child knows about Judaism. This is nearly 2,000 years ago. This is what Josephus writes. Now, nowadays, you would say, well, all kids in school get a basic education. That certainly wasn't the case then, right? So it's not just something that we find in the Chumash. We find throughout history that making sure that every child learned Torah was one of the most, and we could extend that to adults. Here we're talking about children. So coming back to the question, what's the connection between Bamidbar, the wilderness, and the Torah? That the wilderness was open to everyone and it was free, right? It doesn't mention here charging, these teachers charging for education, right? Free Jewish education. Don't know how that works for Cheder fees, but I'm just saying, this is such a fundamental concept, such an important concept, right? No, there is an answer to that. The answer probably is, in the same way that how are people allowed to be paid for teaching Torah? Rabbis and teachers and rebbitzins, because they do get paid. Rambam says that you shouldn't get paid for teaching or studying Torah. So the problem is, what happens if that's what you do full time? So the classic answer is,
Rabbi,
yeah?
we can't see you. We can't see you because you've moved
sorry,
your papers.
right. Oh, hello. I didn't
Thank
notice
you.
that. Right. I'm still here. So the classic answer is you can be paid what you would have otherwise earned. So, for example, if I could be earning, I don't know, whatever, 50 grand as a computer programmer, but I've chosen to give that up and go and teach Torah, then I can be paid compensation for not doing my job, if you like. Right? It's a bit of a get out, but unfortunately, you have to find ways to make sure people get compensated. But it's a question, right? Certainly, how can you charge? Right? I know people. I mean, for some people, it's a parnasa. It's funny. There are people who make money out of giving lectures and talks on Torah, and I understand that it's their parnassa. But it always amuses me slightly because some of them charge very large amounts of money. And if you get in touch with them and say, we'd like you to come to our community, but we can't afford your fees, they'll usually say, "There's nothing I can do about it. This is my fee." And a part of me thinks, you can't have it both ways. If your message is worth hearing, then it shouldn't cost a lot of money. And if it's not worth hearing, then you shouldn't be charging a lot of money, right? But it's easy for me to say that because I'm not in that field. But for some people, that's ultimately how they make a living, through giving talks and so on. But right, amazing thing from Josephus here. He was a historian, so obviously this is his observation of what was going on. He says that if the Jew in the pew, the guy in the street, didn't even say a child, right? The guy in the street will be asked about our laws, he'll know them, be familiar with them. So in answer to Mark's question, it's interesting because it seems in the 18th and 19th, certainly 18th century, 19th century, there was a lot of Jewish illiteracy. I don't know if that was the case in the first century.
Illiteracy or knowledge?
Literacy, lack of literacy.
The inability to read.
Good question. People must have had basic knowledge
Because
by
they learned
osmosis.
orally.
Yeah, they must have had basic knowledge by osmosis, but it definitely seems there was less emphasis on study, right? I mean, I guess it's a bit like going down the mines at age whatever. If you were, for example, if your family was an agricultural family, presumably from a young age, you had to work hard in the fields, so you didn't have time to sit and study. Right? In the same way that, like we said, in England, until recently, people didn't necessarily go to school full time. But the interesting thing about this is from Josephus and from Ezra and Nehemiah, it seems there was a concept of school, certainly in Talmudic times even, concept of children studying and being educated universally.
Was not a school the first thing that was built?
Right? A crucial point here, he said, if they couldn't teach them, they appoint a teacher. Certainly the Mishnah says that's right. So you're allowed to sell various things. A school is very high on the list of things that you need in a town. Right? It doesn't say you need a shul, by the way, very topical. It doesn't say anywhere you need a shul in your town. It says you need a school, you need a shochet for your meat, you need a mikveh. I think it says you need a teacher. Yeah, you need a mikveh. I mean, there's no way, you can't have a portable mikveh. But it doesn't say you need a shul, interestingly, or a minyan even, right? Very topical. Don't think it says, the Mishnah Megillah says, what you can sell this to pay for that, right? You can sell, I think even a Sefer Torah to pay for a mikveh, I can't remember. It doesn't say anywhere you can sell things to pay for a shul. Shul's nice. It's not crucial. Daven at home, as we have been doing. But this source here, number 7, is completely groundbreaking. The idea that, if you like, the community would take responsibility for teaching children. As you said, society didn't take that on until relatively recently. And that probably is the secret of our success. Yes, there are definitely problems in the education that we provide to children nowadays. It's a long discussion. There are more Jewish schools than ever, and the quality of education isn't necessarily better. But nonetheless, let's have a look. Right now, Sally asked about the priesthood and Aaron, right? So there are various crowns, it says in the Mishnah in Avot, right? Oh, sorry, this is the Rambam, it's in Avot as well. Right? Interesting, this is the laws of Torah study. So the Rambam has laws of Torah study. This is the very first law, okay? And he says there's various crowns that you can attain. Who would like to read? Sally, would you like to read?
With the 3 crowns was Israel crowned, the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of kingship. The crown of priesthood was conferred on Aaron. The crown of kingship was conferred on David. But the crown of Torah is for all Israel. Whoever desires it, let them come and take it. What's the definition of a crown?
So again, well, I guess it's the embellishment of the taking on the. I suppose it doesn't literally mean a crown, does it? It means taking, attaining. I guess a crown shows you've achieved something, doesn't it? You're a king. So the concept that you can attain Torah, you can't attain priesthood, that's for Aaron. You can't attain kingship, that's for King David. They always say in America, anyone can be president, right? It's complete nonsense. You need about $50 million, and you need to be white and male, unless you're Obama. But anyway, so not everyone can be a priest, not everyone can be a king, right? We can debate the fairness of that, but that's the reality. But everyone can have Torah. It's everybody's crown. It's everybody's heritage. It's something everyone should be able to attain and grow into, right? And what does the Rambam say? Whoever desires it, let them come and take it. Right? He does say they have to desire it. Elsewhere in Pirkei Avot, it says that the crown of Torah surpasses all, and it says the crown of the good name surpasses all. Right? So you can have certain inherited positions, but Torah is not inherited. It's for everybody. It sounds obvious. If you would have a situation, I don't know, imagine, you've got a shir going on. A guy walks into the shir, he's not particularly religious. He's interested to find out a bit more, and he's not wearing a kippah, right? And then somebody passing by sticks a head in and says, it's disgraceful. How can you sit and study the Holy Torah and you have no respect for it? It's not yours. You don't have any right, right? You would say, no, it is his. Maybe he should show more respect. Fine. But it is everybody's. And like I said, this is very topical in Israel. And they've started having now Yom Kippur. I think they call them secular synagogues, where for people that want a Yom Kippur service, but don't want the rigidity of Orthodox. I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea, but this is a massive, as I said, in Israel, it's more relevant perhaps. In this country, most traditional people most of us been exposed to traditional Torah learning. We're doing it now. We're learning sources, right? So we all learn things. We all have access to the Chumash and basic ideas and basic Jewish laws. But in Israel, certainly you have this polarization. Right? Or you had historically, if you couldn't read Hebrew and you couldn't go to yeshiva, then you were a nobody. And that's not what the Torah says. The Torah says quite clearly, it's everybody's heritage. Comes back to the question, why was it given in the desert? To emphasize that point. Being given in any specific place with a specific quality, in the city or in the country or in Jerusalem or in London, then everybody would say it was theirs. Right? That's the nature of these things. Right? When you have Scottish people get excited about Andy Murray because he's from Scotland, or not, as the case may be. You know what I mean? People get excited about something. Oh, he's from England. Oh, he's from Northeast London. People get excited, right? It becomes parochial. Torah is not parochial. It may sound obvious, and it's there in all the sources, but we don't always realize it. And that's the message of Shavuos. It's everybody's heritage, not just the people that care, even the people that don't care as well, right? The people that don't even realize it yet. Very important point as we come to giving the Torah, because the one fundamental of Shavuot is it says they all stood at the mountain as one. So when we're not there as one, unified, then we're lacking something. Now the question is, half the people these days don't get to the mountain. That's a different challenge, even bigger challenge this year. But it's so important. It's such a fundamental point. This great equalization that everybody should have access, equal access. Now it's interesting. I was talking to. I did an interview with Gemma Roback, Nee Henderson, who just had a baby girl, by the way, another girl. because she works with special needs kids, and we were talking about this. And we were talking about the fact that I mean, Sally, you've mentioned this a few times. We're very good at doing things in English and doing page numbers and, you know, trying to make sure the Mechitza shul is a little bit more friendly at least. And, you know, I don't know, doing things for women and doing things. What we forget is things like people are hard of hearing or people who have other difficulties that actually the page numbers or the English translations or the booklets don't necessarily help with. And we forget that. And that's also part of access, making sure that everyone has access to their heritage. It's very important. It's not easy. It's very important. So anything we do to that end is to be celebrated. Carol, wish you long life.
Thank you.
Just spotted you down there. Can just see your top half. Wish you long life for your outside for your mum
Thank you
today.
very much. Yeah, thank you for doing the prayer for me.
No
Thank
problem.
Very well.
Long
Right.
life.
Any questions, anyone?
Thank you.
Long life,
Thank you
Carol.
very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
Or not.
Sorry?
yeah. No, I've got a question. It's
Yeah.
more to do with the last 50 years. When
Right.
I was young, I wasn't taught the maftir and haftarah, so I don't know how to do the haftarah. Because I'm from a mitzvah, I just had to read from the Sedra. But it seems over the last 30 years, all the young mitzvah boys learn the maftir and haftarah, and I just wanted to know, on an educational point of
Ooh.
view, so
Very good
now.
question. So right now, I was talking to a friend of mine who's the chief rabbi of Perth, and in his community, the boys don't lay in, they do musaf, which means they can do it any week. Because the problem, of course, everyone's having now is all the boys that have learned Mafta and Haftarah, including Mr. Bendon, are, when we get back to shul, they're not going to be able to do that Haftarah, because obviously Haftarah changes every week. This is an old debate, and it gets discussed a lot. I'll frame it for you like this. My son Yisraelik learned most of the Parsha, Naso, right? He would have learned the wrong one if he listened to his father, but fortunately he checked. Okay? His father gave him the wrong one. He learned most of Naso, which is a very long Parsha, right? And he did it because he enjoyed doing it, and he had, Rosh Hashanah, we started early, and he had a lot of time to do it. Now, he's quite frustrated because he's not going to get to lay in it this year. He'll hopefully get to lay in it next year. Is it a waste of time? It's not a waste of time. He's acquired the skill of learning to lay in. But he's also learning a lot of other stuff. So it's not the only thing he's doing, right? But on the Bar Mitzvah boys I teach, most of the time is spent preparing a performance. Now, there is a very strong argument that scrap all of that and just do something meaningful with them that they might remember, they might get something from. Even teach them how to daven something, rather than this performance that everyone will, nowadays they even clap in shul and cheer, and they'll never do it again. So, is it good to learn to lay in? Yes. Is it good to learn to read Haftarahs? Of course it is. It's a good skill to have. Should it be the only thing you do for 18 months, you know, with your teacher, an hour a week, and your homework, if you could be learning other stuff, how to put on tefillin, how to daven, about your parsha. So I always say to bat mitzvah girls that they may feel they get shortchanged because the boys have a big thing in shul. I said, but in some ways they're luckier because they get a lot of choice in what they do. They don't have to have this formal thing. Look, I'm not knocking laning and Haftarah. It's very beautiful. I wish more people could do it. But at the end of the day, you know, it's a bit like running before you can walk. You know, it's we could, yes, you're right. We could use that time with the Bar Mitzvah boys to do so much more. But the culture is you do laning and davening and Haftarah. So
Rabbi,
yeah.
Have you ever suggested that they can be called up and they can recite their own whatever bit they want to do, and then they could do or they could do something else which would be equally meaningful and long-standing?
I have always offered to somebody who's struggling with it that they don't have to do Mafta and Haftarah if they don't want. But most of them, it's usually the parents, to be honest. Parents expect it and they push it a little bit. On the other hand, it means you learn to lay in. You may use that skill one day, you know. So I think there's much to be said on it, but I definitely think there's a very salient point there, which ironically we've come to realize now in lockdown that those who didn't do specific Mafta and Haftarah, but just, you know, practice the brachas or some davening or something else are at an advantage now because they're not going to miss out on the Bar Mitzvah experience, right? One thing everyone's remembering now, you know, you get people in the 80s, Rabbi, I can't count in the minyan, I never had a Bar Mitzvah. Say, are you over 13 years and 1 day? Yes, I think so. Right. So you had a bar mitzvah. Right? Everyone remembers bar mitzvah boy. You can be bar mitzvah standing on your head in a playground. It doesn't matter where you are. So one thing that we're having to do is back to basics. The same way that those who have had weddings have had very simple weddings. And unfortunately, bereavements have been very simple. And it's not for me to tell others how they should feel. But a comment which has been made at several of the Levias I've been to recently is that they've taken on a completely different atmosphere. Used to be you go to Levaya and some of the people take it seriously, and some of the people it's it's a social. And Rabbi Portnoy, that's Rabbi Tzvi Portnoy's father, who's quite stark and can get away with it because he has a presence if anyone knows him. Evidently he used to basically say to people when they go to the grounds for Levaya, be quiet you lot and just be grateful that you're leaving here and not staying, or something to that effect. This should really, it should humble you, and instead everyone's laughing and joking on their phones. Now you go to Levaya, there's maybe 8, 9 people there, sometimes 2 or 3. Every single person there is focused purely on the deceased person. There's no nonsense. There's no one on their phone. There's no one chatting. And the atmosphere is different. And a couple of families have said to me, as difficult as it is, it's much more somber, which is how it should be. So there have been weddings that have taken place in very small numbers of people, both here and in Israel, legally. I'm not talking about illegally. To have a bris with just the parents there, to have a bar mitzvah, not get called up, or a bat mitzvah, not have a party or whatever, or also do your thing in shore. Amelia missed her thing. Very difficult. The only thing is, it's giving, I'm speaking for myself, my son's coming out to bar mitzvah. We're getting a bit of a back to basics. Let's remember what it really is. A wedding is 2 people getting married and make a commitment. Having hundreds of people there is the icing on the cake. A bar mitzvah is your 13th birthday and marking it in some way. Yes, it's nice to have a party with all your friends, but that's not the only thing. And we're being forced to recognize that, sadly. But it does have its benefits as well. A lot cheaper, by the way. We were supposed to have a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, an option, all kinds of things this year. We're saving a fortune. But Mark's point is a very good one. So in Crown Heights, although everybody is basically religious, a lot of people don't learn to learn. Instead, they learn basically some in-depth Torah for their bar mitzvah and they present it. The only problem with that is you walk into shul on Monday morning and no one knows how to lay in. So
it's never too late, Mark.
It's never too late. That's the other thing. Never too late to learn.
No, I'm just wondering why my rabbi didn't teach me the Maftir and Torah, but he taught me to read from the he taught me to read from the Torah scroll, from the Sedra.
Okay, so I think you
why he did that.
I don't know. How was your reading at the time?
Average. It's only average. I think it's got a bit better over the years.
I mean, I don't know.
Average.
I mean, nowadays most people do the Haftarah. I don't know if that was always the case. And what happens if you can't sing in public? Well, you're shy. Who said that you have to sing in public to be Jewish? What's the connection? So there's much to say on that. But we have to recognize also, there's no point not recognizing peer pressure. If you would convince a child that they don't have to do the performance in shul and all their friends are doing it, that's also not always, sometimes you have to recognize that they don't want to not do what their friends are doing. It's a difficult balance. Right.
Okay. Thank you.
We're back at 8 o'clock tonight to talk about Shavuos. Anyone would like to join us?
Is it the same number?
Yeah.
Yes, same details.
Right.
It's but Iris.
Hello?
When you Iris, when you go into Zoom, right? How's it going?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna sign off, folks. Unfortunately, Michael Medallier lost his mother. She was in Bayern John.
Oh, what a character!
Yeah, she used to go to lunch club.
Lady, Lisa West's grandma.
Lisa West's grandma.
Was it Michael's mum was Nifta, unfortunately. She wasn't well for a while. She used to come to lunch club, no?
No, she never.
No, she didn't.
I'm
sorry. I'm thinking of Anthony's mum. Yeah, of course.
Sinclair House. She was often there. And I said to her, "Are you going to come to my reminiscence?" She says, "No, and I don't like what you do, and I don't like you either." I said, "That's fine, Anne. Don't worry about it." Real character. She used to live on her own in Hermitage.
Right.
Amazing lady.
Yeah, so I'm going to go off and call him, but I'll leave this open if you want to chat. And we're back at 8 o'clock tonight. So farewell.
Okay, see you tonight, Rabbi.
I've got to go.